Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to In Time. My name is Nick Soutter, and with me today is ProLib. Ethan, how are you?
Wonderful. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good, thank you. I'm doing real
I'm
good. It was a
glad. I'm
good
glad.
weekend. I'm all rested, like, okay, ready to go. Let's do it. We got like 6 shows planned already this week, so it's
Right.
it's it's gonna be a long. Oh, so yeah, I'm excited for it. So we've got right now, we're going to bring out in just a minute Uncivil Law. He's going to talk to us. A lot of people have been asking questions, especially of me, as if I know what the hell I'm doing, about is X, Y, and Z legal constitutionally? What does it take for uh, the Insurrection Act to be invoked? What are the bounds of it? The posse comitatus, and also just a million things. We also have, as we covered a couple days ago, that temporary restraining order against the Denver police, the use of non-lethal munitions. We have a possible federal lawsuit being enacted against the Seattle Police Department for the use of the LDAR, the long distance acoustic, those things. So we'll get into it. We also have a lot of questions from a lot of people in the Discord. Tony Designs is dropping a link to our Discord there. Anybody who wants to posit questions there, put it in our live chat. We're also going to be simulcasting to Uncivil Law's channel, so we'd like to welcome all of his people with us. If this is working correctly, which is a 50-50, we did this kind of at the last minute, but hopefully we've actually got the chat of all people being echoed back and forth between the two channels. We'll see. If not, we'll blame Uncivil Law. That's what he's here for. So, any questions? Please let us know after this. After this show, we're going to do a hangout. This is going to be the one we were talking about. It's just anyone who wants to talk about what their experiences have been. We have a medic who was actually basically on the front lines of the riots. Hopefully, he's going to be able to make it. We got a couple of people that we're having come tonight, so looking forward to that. One immunocompromised person who has had all of the riots just outside his door every single night. He's been coping. So anyone who wants to come and join us for that hangout, we'll be doing the after show about 5 minutes after the close of this show. On Civil Law will be joining us for that one as well. Tomorrow we're going to have at 2 p.m. Ozzy is going to be back. We're going to be doing another episode of our series on Introduction to Philosophy. We're going to be doing just basic epistemology with him tomorrow, and then we will be doing our Patreon hangout tomorrow at 9 p.m. So looking forward to that. And then Matt Dillahunty will be on the 16th to discuss debate. Do we still need formal debates? Are there any purpose to them? And how do you prepare for formal debates? All that other stuff. We're looking forward to seeing him on the 16th. Anything else that I missed, Ethan, and we need to cover before we bring out Uncivil Law?
I think that's it.
Perfect.
It's a full schedule
I,
ahead.
I know, I know. It's nice. It's much better to have too much to do than not enough. Without that, please, everybody, welcome our guest, Uncivil Law.
How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. So,
No
I,
problem.
I actually, while we're chatting, I'll just check and make sure that this is actually going to be on your stream as well. So, how now? I have to believe you run a law channel. Could you tell us a little bit about what you do, what your YouTube channel is, and what you're normally doing?
Yeah, sure. So the channel's called Uncivil Law, and basically I read U.S. Supreme Court cases, appeals cases, Supreme Court of insert state here that are interesting on topics I find just interesting, trying to maintain education people about developments there in law and try to have some timeliness too. So it's basically a hodgepodge of major Supreme Court cases. So about half the Supreme Court cases during the year are notable enough, and otherwise just cover major developments that are happening. Of course,
All right, your audio did start to robot there just a little bit. I'm going to see. I don't know if that's. I don't think that's on our end, but I'm going to double check here just in case. But all right. So we'll put a link to that in the description. I don't think we have that in now. Recently, you did just cover what happened in Denver. So in Denver, there was a restraining order filed against the Denver Police Department. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
yeah, sure. So there were people who went to the court in Denver, the state court, that was by the request of the Denver police. And so then the Denver District Federal Court heard the case, and the request was to ban certain uses of non-lethal or less than lethal force. The judge doing other things, prohibiting the police from targeting someone in their head, their groin, or their back with projectile force, prevented them from using projectile force by in an indiscriminate way, and forbid the use of pepper gas or tear gas unless authorized. Originally wrote was a captain, but then they later changed that to a lieutenant. So basically,
Ooh.
someone with a more advanced authority be in a position to. They personally observed it to see what was happening. It also required them to keep their body cameras on at all times, employ the purposes of riot control. And so those were the big talking points of that.
So, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to up your volume just a little bit because I think there's some complaints here that the volume's a little low. You have been roboting a bit. Ethan, is he roboting for you or is it just me?
Let me disconnect and reconnect real fast and see if it makes a difference. So give me 1 second.
All right.
Yeah, the meat, because you seem to be dropping out a little bit in the meat for me too, Nick. So
Okay.
I think it might be the Google Meet. And I saw. I meant to read about that before we had you on. Clarify on that ruling. That went into effect immediately, right? So that was
Yes.
That was an injunction or a
temporary restraining order.
Temporary restraining order. So
Sure.
Why? Question.
The way it was written, it would not expire. It could obviously be modified by a court. Temporary orders are temporary,
Sure.
but they don't automatically expire. So you can get 3 different kinds of injunctions depending on what state the law. Temporary restraining order, which comes fast. You have then you can also have a preliminary injunction, which lasts for the length of the case. So a TRO usually expires, as a practical matter, within days or weeks. And have sometimes a preliminary injunction, which usually lasts for the entire length of the case. And then you have permanent injunction issued for the end of the case, which will be going on for all of time, unless further modified by some other court decision. And involve levels of review because of those natures. So TROs, because they happen so fast, they are risk courts. They tend to not be issued except in the most extreme situations, and they tend to be very narrow in construction. The most common place that they're issued is for domestic violence situations in terms of in a household. Those are the most common places that they tend to be issued as a matter of course. Otherwise, they're very rare. So to see a TRO issued, especially against the police, is pretty notable. So it was fairly exceptional when it happened.
Okay, and then just for a clarification on my part real quick, can you explain the difference between a temporary restraining order and a normal restraining order?
So it depends what they mean by restraining order, but typically it's a more permanent injunction. So when we're talking about these things, I'm talking about federal law. These are federal law terms. So if you're thinking about a restraining order for domestic violence, for example, that's going to be issued by a state court. So state courts can use different language than federal courts. So they might call it something different in a particular state. But yeah, a restraining order is essentially just a permanent injunction. It's just in effect until it's not. And sometimes by their own terms, they set out limits on time. So again, for a restraining order, it's not unusual for them to have a time limit put in there, whether that be months or years or whatever. But sometimes they're indefinite. It depends on the court that's issuing them. But yeah, that's just in the nature of it. It's mostly about the nature of the process and what's required. So you're not going to get a permanent restraining order against you until you have sufficient process. So they'll put in place a temporary order if they feel like there's an immediate need, but you're going to have an ability to come before a court and challenge that. And if you show the challenge is successful, they'll withdraw the TRO and you won't have a permit order. So you're not going to have that permit order until you have due process. So TROs are designed by their nature to fix a problem that exists right now. This demonstrable, obvious, something we have to deal with, something that we can't, especially something we can't fix later. So if money will fix it, you won't get these injunctions. So if you're in a contract breach with me, for example, I can be made whole with money. So they're not going to give an injunction because I can just be made whole at the end with money. But obviously, where people's livelihoods or people's safety is threatened, you can't do that. So, but they tend to be very cautious because of the nature of them.
The police department fought back reasonably hard against that order. Now, if I recall, that order had suggested that they a captain level or higher would be needed to sit there, and he would have to assess that the protest had in fact become violent. B, they had been given a chance to withdraw. C, that was a legit chance, so they weren't kettled. There actually was a way out. They don't. So the fact that all of these things were enumerated, does that suggest that there's been a problem in the past with police officers kind of doing this kind of thing? Is that what that was intended to avoid? What if any message do you think the court may have been sending with that?
Well, the court in its order did mention that it had reviewed various videos that had been submitted to the court. So I would suspect that whatever videos they were reviewing gave them enough information to suspect there had been indiscriminate use of force in at least some situations by people who were peaceful, people who weren't doing anything wrong. So the TRO, what it said was, for example, for the use of pepper gas, you could use it to disperse a crowd in general, but you have to give advance notice and an opportunity for people to flee. The one with captains was dealing more with emergent situations. So there was a difference in the TRO, the way it was written, in terms of pepper gas, for example. For a non-emergent situation, such as people standing on the highway and blocking access. So that'd be more non-emergent. So in that situation, you didn't need that authorization from the lieutenant or the captain. In that situation, though, you did need to give fair notice and an opportunity for people to leave, so that people would be aware that you were going to do that before you use that. The one with the captains, or in this case, lieutenant, as it was modified, was meant to deal with emergent situations where there is, a situation that's happening where situations are becoming unrest. And it required that person to personally witness it in order to authorize it. So they couldn't rely on a report from someone. They had to personally see it. And again, I think that the TRO in its nature is temporary and is meant to be a stopgap where more delineated things can come into play. So it's not intended to be permanent. It's intended to try to fix a problem that exists right now and can be modified as needed. But it's meant to try to craft. I thought it was a fairly well crafted TRO, all things considered. The two ones the police really had a problem with, whereas the captains say, well, that's too high a rank. We only have 4 captains and 1 commander. So we don't have enough people to do this. So can you lower it down so we have a little bit more discretion? And the other one they had a real problem with was the video cameras, because they said these cameras can only run for so long. The batteries are only so big. The memory cards are only so big. And we can't run this continuously, and we don't have enough for everybody. So at least they modified the lieutenant part. I don't think they modified the camera part. But that doesn't mean they might not modify it tomorrow based on further things. So they're just meant to try to solve a problem right now, essentially freeze everyone in place so that we can hear a more full adjudication.
And who brought the request for the restraining order?
There were 4 citizens among some other public interest group. So one of them at least had, I think, lost an eye. One of them was a reporter who had lost an eye due to one of these projectiles, and other people had been seriously injured as a result of that. And so there was at least 4 separate individuals and an organization. So one of the things that makes it a little bit, again, atypical for the police is it's a little bit atypical to do injunctions for future unspecified harm by the police. So I was covering a case recently on my own channel from the U.S. Supreme Court from the 80s, where this guy was complaining about chokeholds that were being used in Seattle at the time, and saying, well, I've been subject to an improper chokehold. It caused me this damage, and I want an injunction going forward because of this. And the Supreme Court said no, because you can't show that this is an inevitable consequence of what will happen. It's too speculative, for a permanent injunction. But again, that goes, I think, the difference between a TRO and a permanent injunction. TROs are only meant to solve a problem right now. So you would not expect this to manifest into a permanent order, because it's too speculative in the long term because you can't show that you will inevitably result in this treatment from every police officer, or that's a matter of global policy. It's meant to solve a problem that exists right now. And I think what is interesting about this in terms of a precedential perspective is it's extremely true in law that no one really wants to be the first to do anything. And when someone is the first, it makes it a lot easier for other courts to do it. It's that first person who's willing to say yes. So I would expect that you would see some things be issued along these lines by other courts, because they're like, well, he did it. Which, again, in a common law system like we use, that's kind of the point. We're supposed to do based on what happened before. So like, well, they did it, and so I'll do it too. So it would not be unexpected to me to see similar orders of similar veins issued in similar situations.
Can you talk about that for one quick second? Give us a layman's rundown of the difference between precedent and written law, judicial review, essentially.
All right, sure. So we use a common law system, and other countries such as France, for example, use a civil law system. So the main difference between the two is, in a civil law system, the text of the statute is what governs. And what doesn't matter is what happened to someone else. So, for example, as I understand it, not that I'm an expert in the law of France, but this is how I understand it. If you brought a case in France, a judge is going to look at the statute, and he's going to read it, and he's going to figure out how it applies to you, which sounds really great, up until the fact that you realize that means that as different judges are looking at essentially the same case, they will come out differently, because they're not guided by what happened in another case. They're only guided by the text of the law. So you could have the exact same case brought before two different judges in France, and one will come out one way and one will come out another way. There's nothing you can do about it, because they don't work on precedent that way. Whereas in the US system, as we inherited from the UK, this common law system, we do things based on what happens before. So not only what happens is the text, but also how we treated other cases. In some ways, I think it's a lot more fair, because for better or worse, what is likely to happen to you because of what happened to the last 20 people that were in your situation. So in a lot of ways, it's more predictable, because everyone is at least in the same fact pattern trying to get essentially the same result. Now, what makes the US a little bit more complicated is, of course, we have a common law system that's divided by states and a federal government. So we have different states operating differently, but as long as you're within the same jurisdiction, so if you're within the state courts of Minnesota or Colorado or California, then in the same case, it should come out the same way under the same statute, because they all look to that common law, the common expression and common understanding of the law as it's been interpreted. And it's also really helpful as we're understanding terms like, for example, the crime of assault. I covered on my law channel one time the very first assault case ever. It was a case from the United Kingdom in the 14th century. And basically, it sets out assault as you know it today. So we've been doing the same thing for 600 years. That's a lot of predictability. So there's a lot of going to be enjoyed by that.
So, given now that this has set a precedent, are there rumblings of anybody? I mean, so far, it looks like a huge part of this, in my view, was Donald Trump saying that he was going to end all of these things tonight, that he was, everyone needs to engage in total domination. And, now that he's dialed back some of that rhetoric, and now that a number of states have lifted their curfews, it seems like the protests are getting bigger, but there does appear to be less violence proportionally based on the size of those protests. Do you think that other states and or parties may attempt to do the same thing in other states? Do you think there's still a need? Where do you see this headed right now?
So I will say that this is a good general principle of law in general, is that a lot of things are fact-based. So situations dictate different results, not because the law really is different, but because the facts are creating a different result under the tests we would normally use. So, for example, we might get into this, some of the lockdown orders that were put in place because of the coronavirus, for example, at least to my perspective, it's not that the law changed or was suspended or the Constitution changed or was suspended. It's that we have a series of tests that we normally use in law. And those tests normally come out a particular way. But the facts were such that the test we normally use comes out differently. So the result was different, not because the law was different, but because the facts compelled a different result under the tests we would standardly use. So with respect to your immediate question in terms of the use of force, I can see to the extent that the cops are continuing that behavior, you would see those same results issued by courts. To the extent that they're not, the factual predicate has changed. So you wouldn't expect a court to issue a TRO if the need for it is not as manifest as it was. So the Colorado case created a reason that other courts can rely on. But that reason is predicated on the facts that exist in those cases. So when we think about common law, we also reason by analogy and we look for comparable cases. So the situation, at least as far as the plaintiffs were telling it, was that the police were firing rubber bullets into crowds indiscriminately, using tear gas indiscriminately. They were purposely firing shotgun projectiles at people's faces and their crotches and their backs, and otherwise people who were helpless and things like that. And apparently the court saw enough video to let them think that that was a pretty plausible contention.
Right.
So the result doesn't surprise me. So to the extent that those kind of facts are similar in another situation, I'd expect a TRO. To the extent they're not, I wouldn't.
And it was more than just video, right? Wasn't it multiple modes of media?
Oh, I'm sure there was, but
Yeah.
I just know from the, I mean, they heard some sort of, I don't think they heard witnesses, but they had some sort of expression from people. I'm sure there were images and videos, but the court saw enough to be like, I got to do something about this right now.
So we have a question from the chat. Speaking of assault, can uncivil law address the person who was arrested for assault with a deadly weapon for throwing a gas canister back at police when they had fired it from a grenade launcher?
That's a good question.
Okay.
That's a really good. Okay, yeah.
So, yeah, I can walk you through it. So, your right to self-defense doesn't. Everyone has their own right to self-defense that's implicated or not. And so, just because it was fired at him doesn't necessarily imply the reverse. So, if we assume the police were acting properly and lawfully in their use of force, which I understand is a big predicate, but let's go with that. They were using their force properly, right? So they were using their force properly. So they threw a tear gas properly. So they were in the right. If he then throws it back, he doesn't have the same legal justification the police did. They were using it, again, in the predicate. They were using it in a lawful way. His use becomes unlawful. So again, it's the same behavior, but one's lawful and one's not lawful. You know, if person A shoots person B, that might be murder, it might be self-defense, it might be a whole bunch of other things. We have to look to exactly what the situation is and what their legal foundation is.
Sure. I think the question, though, is how can it be assault with a deadly weapon if tear gas is considered non-lethal?
Well, I think that's the second part of the. I think the question comes in both parts, but yeah, please.
Yeah, so I think that that's a fair point, but again, I don't. First of all, even if it is a deadly weapon, so we assume it's a deadly weapon. Like if the police can use that deadly force, then and also it's considered less than lethal, not typically.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Less than lethal, right?
But you would look to the ability to create the damage that is being caused, and it also goes with intent. So, like, you know, assault with a deadly weapon can be anything. It can be a rock I find on the ground. It can be a brick, to use an example that's relevant.
It could be this fist.
Yeah, it could be this fist. Maybe it could be a lot of things. So, yeah, you have to look to its meaning of the statute and how that was being used and the intent behind it. And whether or not that sticks, of course, is a whole other set of problems.
Sure.
But, that the idea that, it might be deadly force seems plausible.
So we had an interesting report, and I don't know. This is we pick up a lot of people drop news in our Discord, and we're just constantly going through stuff and trying to make heads or tails of it before doing a show and trying to figure out what we're going to use. But there was an interesting one of a number of police officers who came, I think 6 or 7 police officers, I want to say this was in Colorado also, who grabbed a woman, went to her house, grabbed her out of her car. Her 2-year-old was still in the back, and one of the officers said, "You assaulted me 3 days ago. We're bringing you in now." And there's footage of this. We could actually probably find it and bring it up if we wanted to. But in general, if somebody assaults a police officer, it's my understanding, and I'm novice at this, it's my understanding that if the police wanted to do something, how would they go about that? Would they go in a few days later, pick her up and bring her in? Would they talk to a judge first? What would happen?
So typically the police can arrest on a broad probable cause standard, which would differ from a civilian, for example. So the police, in order to conduct an arrest, just need probable cause. So if they personally witnessed the assault happen against them and they believe that it's the same person, then presumably they can meet their probable cause standard. Probable cause is pretty low. It's on a scale of 1 to 10, probable cause is probably somewhere around a 1.5. It's a pretty low standard. It's just enough to get you started. Whereas like beyond reasonable doubt, for example, is like 9.5 out of 10. So this is the kind of scale we're talking about. So it's a very preliminary scale. It's just enough to get you started. So is it enough for probable cause? Well, if they personally recognize it, I recognize it because it happened to me. Yeah, probably you're there. Now, the fact that they're dragged out of the car is really interesting because the car can sometimes be considered part of a home for some legal purposes. And the fact, if you want to get someone from their home, if you want to go and arrest them in their home, you need a warrant. You can't arrest someone in their home unless the crime is happening in front of you without a warrant. So if I know that you're the person who did it and I want to arrest you in your home, I can't go to your home and arrest you. I have to get a warrant for that. If I arrest you outside, that's a whole nother problem, which incidentally is one of many reasons the police will ask you if they come to your door to step outside for exactly that reason, because you're no longer in your home now, are you? Yeah, so I wouldn't recommend that. But the fact that they pulled her out of her car is a bit problematic. So that would be an interesting legal question. We'll get into specifics of state law on that issue.
All right, and then I do have, because I have a couple other questions, but there's one somebody just dropped in the live chat, which I think was an important one. So in response to widespread George Floyd protests this week, a New York State Supreme Court judge has suspended the right of habeas corpus, which requires the government.
State Supreme Court is the lowest court in New York.
Okay, so
it's New York City judges.
Because New York can't name their system in a way that makes sense. The Supreme Court of New York is the trial court. It's the lowest level court of New York.
You're kidding.
It's like the magistrate, the municipal court.
You appeal from the Supreme Court of New York to the appellate division, and then you appeal from the appellate division to the Court of Appeals. The Court of Appeals is the highest court in New York. The Supreme Court is the lowest court in New York. It's just a random trial judge. It's a random judge.
Oh, okay. So that's worth noting.
Let's do a quick rundown of what habeas corpus is.
Mm-hmm. So sure, there's a federal statute that basically says that unless authorized by the Constitution or another federal statute, act of Congress, which is your big exception language, you can't deploy the Army or the
National Guard.
No, it's specifically Army. It's Army and who else? It's not Marines.
Army and Navy.
Navy. I think it's Navy. I think Navy, okay. Maybe, but it doesn't matter. Anyways, you can't deploy the Army and some other branch of the military for the purposes of conducting a police action. Now, police actions are everything that's not military is police, and everything that's police is not military is basically the short way to deal with that. So when you talk about police power, you talk about all the power of government to do stuff. All the laws that they could pass is police power. So they can't enforce police powers. They can't enforce domestic laws, another way of saying that.
But
there's a big exception, because if you have authorization from a constitution or another act of Congress, you can do it. And that's where the Insurgency Act comes in.
But okay, now that's we were asking about habeas corpus. I think you were answering.
I apologize.
You answered.
I misunderstood your question,
other?
or I went off in tangent.
No, that's a good one. That's the posse comitatus. Yes.
So I misheard it, or
no worries.
whatever. I apologize. Yes, habeas corpus. All right, habeas corpus is called the Great Writ. It just means produce the body, and because corpus is body, right? So or let us see the body is another way of saying that. It's the Great Writ. Basically, it's what you do if you think you're being held unlawfully. It is literally an order from a court to produce the person and justify why they're being held in jail. So the writ of habeas corpus is why are you lawfully able to hold me? It's considered the Great Writ. It's actually mentioned in the Constitution. You can't suspend it except if you have martial law, and you can't do that if the courts are still meeting. So it's considered pretty important.
So basically, the right to see a judge before
the right to see a judge. Yes. Why are you holding me?
Trevor Lynn. Well, hold on. I got to say, Trevor Lynn. Yeah. The New York Supreme Court is equivalent to the Supremes without Diana Ross.
So I like that. Yeah. So, that threw me off. Okay. So what? How? I'm trying to say this in a way without using a bunch of cuss words. What right does any judge have to overrule the Constitution? Ever? Like, how is this even justifiable in any way, shape, or form?
Okay, wow, that's a lot.
Yeah, I was about to say, I think the nature of the evening just changed.
All right.
Trying to keep.
Well, you obviously can't overrule the Constitution, but we use these different tests in different situations for different things. So I'll give you the brief rundown for constitutional review, for example. So when you're looking for a government passing a law and you're wondering if they can do it, you usually have 3 different standards that you apply depending on the situation. So your normal everyday law is rational basis. And then sometimes you have intermediate scrutiny, and then at the very top is strict scrutiny. So the very highest standard you have is strict scrutiny. So if you want to, for example, you want to do a ban on speech on specific subject matter, that's going to be a problem. So because that's strict scrutiny. You can't do that unless you can prove strict scrutiny. You have to prove a compelling governmental interest, and it has to be the least restrictive means. So that's really, really hard. But for example, the famous phrase, which I hate using because it's from a bad case and it's bad law, but it's an example everyone knows. The famous example is shouting fire in a crowded theater. Mm-hmm. Why can't you do that? Well, because it would ensue a panic. Because what would you expect to happen? Everyone run for the exits. That creates an imminent harm to everyone who's there. So, that would be an example of where strict scrutiny might work. You have a compelling governmental interest, people's safety, and it is very narrow. It's the least restrictive means. We can't do anything less. There's nothing less we can do than say, well, you can't shout in a crowd theater. How can we possibly draw it as a more narrow rule than that? So that would be an example of where strict scrutiny might work. So when you're looking at, for example, the quarantine orders that were put in place, a little unclear what standard of review you would use. You could either use intermediate scrutiny or strict scrutiny. It's a little unclear. The reason it's a little unclear is because, for example, you are preventing people from going outside and protesting, or you're preventing people from going to churches, or you're preventing people from assembling. These are or you're preventing people from presenting redress of grievances by, standing outside the courthouse or the town hall and protesting. These are pretty important First Amendment rights, right?
Yeah.
All right. These are pretty important.
Got this war about it back in the 17 something.
Yeah, it's pretty important. Now, at least what they were doing 2 months ago versus today, which I think is a really interesting distinction, because today I think it comes out a little bit differently. But 2 months ago, what they were doing was it applied to everyone. It was a universal rule. So they weren't doing it based on what you were saying. They were doing it content neutral. They weren't doing it based on your viewpoint. It was viewpoint neutral. So no matter what you wanted to say, we weren't discriminating against who you were. We weren't discriminating against subject. We weren't discriminating against view. It's a broad rule of general applicability. So normally for that, you use intermediate scrutiny. Not clear if you would here, but that's normal rule. I'll give you an example where it would clearly apply. You want to, this is a case called RAV, which is why I know it's good law because it's been the U.S. Supreme Court. You can, for example, put in a law that would prevent people from using sound amplification equipment in a park if you have a reason, if it's narrowly tailored. If you have a substantial interest in narrowly tailored. Why am I doing it? Oh, there's a school nearby. Oh, there's other people here and they want to also engage in other activities. And I don't want people generally doing that. You know, I have some reasonable reasons. You can host a parade, but you need to file a permit, you know, that kind of stuff. It's neutral law. So 2 months ago, when they first put these in place, maybe intermediate scrutiny. You know, it's a general rule. Do we have a substantial governmental interest? Yeah, people not getting sick. Is it narrowly tailored? Yeah, probably 2 months ago. Now, today, it becomes out a little bit differently because today, I think you can make a better than credible case that the orders are subject matter based or even viewpoint matter based. Why? Well, look at what's happening. 2 months ago, when people were protesting about the quarantine orders, it was you are killing grandma if you protest. Now you protest racism, and it's like, well, racism though. But you can't do that if you're the government because you're favoring some viewpoints and not others. You're favoring some subjects and not others. If you let people protest because of Black Lives Matter, you have to let them protest because of other subjects too. You can't discriminate based on subject like that. Right. So these orders now, I think, are unconstitutional because the standard has become elevated because of the differential treatment. Was any of that helpful?
No, I think it's definitely helpful. I think, you know, when I was a kid, I went to this was late 90s, 96-ish, something like that. There was a white supremacist rally or something in a nearby town. And they announced it. It was public. And a bunch of us went to counter protest. It was very civil. You know, we held up signs. And we were all kids, you know, most of us. But I remember the guy at the loudspeaker in the most snarling, sniveling way was like, well, I'm gonna paraphrase. I can't remember exactly how I said it, but basically, you know, we have the right to say what we want to say, and you have the right to say what you want to say. And thank you for being here and protesting against us because it you know allows us to be here and protest. Or so it was just a complete like twist of what the actual law is, and it made me want to run over there and punch him in his mouth. But back when the ACLU was a little bit more even-handed in its First Amendment treatment, for example, they famously defended the right of the Klan to march in Skokie, Illinois, which I thought was correct. I don't know if they did it today, but that's what they did then. Right, and that's what I was going to say. I will always support the right of anyone to protest anything, as long as they're not, you know, calling for genocide or anyone to be harmed or whatever.
Right.
I support your right to say what you have to say and protest what you have to protest. I might think that you're a terrible, terrible person, but I support your right to do it. And I think, you know, for me, the lockdowns were about my safety and the safety of my family.
Sure.
And so I have the choice, I think, to participate or not participate. But I understand, too, the government saying, hey, listen, the public safety is in danger and we have to take these steps. We're not saying that you're not allowed to own a business. We're just saying that right now your business can't be owned and operate because it endangers the safety of the public, because you are putting people in danger inadvertently. Or without direct action, you're causing safety issues for other people. And
this is what I was saying. I apologize. Finish your thought.
Yeah, I'm almost done. And I think the difference is if people want to go protest at these Black Lives Matter protests, they should. I haven't gone to any. My stepdaughter has a respiratory issue. She has to take a pill every single night or she starts wheezing. And she's not old enough to get the childhood asthma test. We think it's childhood asthma, but you have to be 5. She's not there yet. So we haven't gone because of that reason. We are afraid of contracting the virus and giving it to her. but if that wasn't the case, I would have been there, and I would go. And I would have also gone to these people that were protesting the lockdowns, and I would have counter-protested at them if we weren't in global pandemic lockdown mode, because I believe that protesting is the greatest. Protests are riots that are nice, and as everyone knows, riots are the language of the unheard, and that's why we need the right to protest in our Constitution and our society.
Well, I certainly support the right to protest. I don't support the right to riot. I don't support the right to
Sure.
loot and burn
Sure.
things and all that stuff. But
No, only in Minecraft.
But yeah, fair enough. Minecraft is whatever. But what you were saying about the quarantine goes back to a point I was trying to make earlier, which is the tests that we normally use just come out differently. So again, to also go to a question you were asked earlier, it's not that judges are overruling the Constitution, it's that we in law have these long established tests that we normally use for various situations, depending on what we're trying to do. You
Sure.
know, you're a government, you want to regulate speech. Well, what kind of speech are you doing? Is it commercial speech, advertising? Okay, intermediate scrutiny. You can, for example, insist on truth as part of a condition. You can require certain businesses to put out certain disclaimers for cigarette manufacturers, for example, that kind of thing, right?
Mhm.
Okay, but well, what if it's political speech? Well, now we're in a different territory because that goes to the core First Amendment interests. And, you know, you look at all that. So I don't know, for example, how you feel about Citizens United, but I have very famously said I thought it came out correctly because Citizens United.
All right, I gotta go.
Citizens United was at its core about political speech, and that's normally the highest speech that we have, I think, for good reason. But I think that the ability of people to say what they want is good. First of all, I think that mold grows in the dark places and sunlight is the best disinfectant. I think that, you know, the protests at Charlottesville, not to be confused with the violence at Charlottesville, but the protests were fundamentally good. Why? Because it exposes that. It lets us know that's a thing. And also then we can point at those people and laugh. I think this is overall productive. I think
Not
this is an
just
overall
laugh.
beneficial thing. I think it is. I think it is negative to cause those things to only exist in the dark places because
Sure.
then we don't understand it, and I think it's a problem. So I take some comfort in the fact that idiots can march for whatever they were marching about, people not replacing them or whatever crap they were spewing, and other people can come out with their messages, and the government doesn't discriminate. It gives me validation that I can say stupid things and be okay.
Sure. No, and I agree with you. Listen, I think that everyone who was there at Charlottesville, who was protesting and saying whatever they were, I don't even understand. I truly don't understand what they were protesting. They were protesting that everyone wasn't white or something. Like, I don't even know. But I support their right to do that. I think the issue.
I my right to call them an idiot. This is all
right.
great.
Sure. And that I agree with you. You're going to come on my show. We're going to talk about Citizens United. We're going to spend a whole hour on it.
We're bringing him here for that one because yeah. I can actually see both. I have no problem with Citizens United if you made all campaign contributions anonymous. You'd have to make them all anonymous and make it illegal to reveal the source. No, other than that, I object to it, but strongly.
The problem is that corporate speech doesn't need to be protected in the same way mine does because I don't have the ability to amplify it like they do. Okay, listen, we'll talk about it another time, but no, I'm giving you mental. I'm throwing things at you.
He's
Minecraft.
He's calling no.
Your brain may have a conniption. That's okay. Well, yes, we can talk about it. No problem.
We will. No, that'll be fun. But I want to move forward with what you're saying. So I think that a lot of times people confuse. There was. We're not going into this chat. Don't even try. But someone in our community recently was served with a restraining order.
Sure.
And somebody, well, not somebody, a lot of people who support that person were trying to say that person was being censored, which completely misunderstands what censorship is and what restraining orders are and what they're for. So, you know, and I've seen the same argument made, which is why I bring it up, about the censorship of business owners or whatever within these lockdowns, that their rights were being infringed upon, which is what censorship is. Censorship is tied fundamentally to the First Amendment, which is fundamentally about political speech, as you said. Me saying I don't like cauliflower isn't necessarily protected by the First Amendment because it just doesn't apply. I'm still allowed to say it. We still live in a society where I'm free to say I don't like cauliflower, but because it's not political in its nature, the First Amendment just doesn't apply to it directly anyway. Of course, there's precedent over the years. I'm just talking about the text itself. So could you talk a little bit about the way in which these businesses are affected, with these lockdowns, and why or why not it's affected by the First Amendment?
Well, I don't think there's much First Amendment in your normal average business, just being able to put something on sale. I mean, most businesses have speech components to it. Please come shop at my store and the advertising they run and things like that. But in terms of like the core of a business, there's not much First Amendment in it, unless your business is press or something like that. So if you're a bookshop or something, we'll have a talk. But your average run-of-the-mill business, then no, not so much. Your interests there are not primarily First Amendment. Your interests there are in being able to do commerce. And again, the normal standards we would apply come out differently because of the situation. So I don't see the speech impact to your average normal business or the First Amendment impact. It's not obvious. I mean, the closest you could get is right of assembly, and that's really not what that's talking about. Again, unless your business, again, is a church, then you have a religious freedom argument. But under the very classic and much maligned case called Lemon, so it's called the Lemon test, because it's a neutral rule of general applicability. Again, when they were doing it to all them equally, it wasn't a problem because churches weren't being discriminated because they were churches. Right. Now it looks a little bit more suspicioso because churches are being treated differently, even though other places aren't for no particular reason.
Well, because they're asking to be treated differently. But go on.
Yeah, well, one of the things that people have been saying, well, the reason the churches are being treated differently is because people are all standing together and they're singing, and so people are breathing on each other in confined spaces. And I'm like, okay, well, that was a pretty good argument right up until like I saw the marches, like literally all the places, and people are screaming at each other without masks. I'm like, you think we might get some spittle projectile going out there? It's like, apparently we found the vaccine for COVID. I didn't know, but apparently we did. Apparently it is anti-racism. That is the cure. So we no longer have to worry about this. This disease is a miracle.
It's going to be so bad in a couple of weeks. It's going to be really, really bad.
And somehow this will be blamed on the Republicans. I'm not sure, but somehow it's our fault.
Of course. No, I agree. Thank you for admitting it. Also,
we are all in agreement for the first time since the show started.
And we agreed on free speech.
We do agree on free speech. Going forward with that. So a lot of people don't realize this. Originally, freedom of religion was about keeping the government out of religion, not the religion.
Oh, sure, it goes both ways. Yeah, neither establishment nor suppression. Right.
Right, and a lot of people don't think about that in our modern times, that the reason the Pilgrims were here was religious oppression, and they really did not want that to continue. And now that we're seeing, especially with this administration, I think it was bad with the George W. administration. Well, I guess Reagan, Bush 1, Bush 2, and now Trump. We see this marriage of religion.
Who's your
and politics.
favorite modern Republican president? Just out of random curiosity.
What's modern?
Let's say.
I mean, are we talking
Lincoln? In your lifetime? In your lifetime?
My favorite Republican president in my lifetime?
Yes.
He's a kid. Oh,
all right. How about in the past 40 years?
Okay. I mean, those things are the same. It would be George the First. I mean, at least he was director of the CIA and did something before he was president.
There you go.
I like George the First, and and Ronald Reagan.
I didn't say I liked him. I said he was my favorite. I mean,
okay, I stand corrected.
I guess I can have favorite pimples too, but
Okay, and I thought Reagan deserves far more credit for bankrupting the Soviet Union than he gets credit for, and a few other things. He closed all the mental hospitals.
Reagan continued Reagan continued the efforts of others. Don't even.
Okay.
That was Kissinger's deal, and I hate Henry Kissinger, but Henry Kissinger bankrupted the Soviets. Let's be honest.
I will say this: there are some areas with which I will simply not engage pro-lib because his knowledge exceeds mine by an order of magnitude. This is one of them.
The only modern Republican that I have like respect for.
He has to do the air quotes. He can't. Okay, yeah.
George the First because of his history with the CIA, but I mean. The thing with the Iran Contra, I can't.
I like
you got to go back to Eisenhower. I'm sorry, you have to go back to Eisenhower. I have to be, and that's not my lifetime.
I would have voted. I would have voted for
Eisenhower
McCain.
sound.
I probably would have voted for McCain over Gore. Frankly, if McCain had been the nominee versus Gore as opposed to Bush, I always.
Well, if we're going historical, you don't want to go with the creator of the EPA, Clean Water Act.
Listen, we don't talk about Nixon because he's on Roger Stone's back. He is a tattoo on Roger Stone's back. You can't. You don't bring him up. This is okay. Listen, Nixon did a lot for social justice. No, he truly did. He truly did a lot for social justice. He actually, of any modern Republican, he did more for African Americans than any other Republican.
Yeah.
He really he didn't do a lot. I'm not saying he did much, but he did more. Then you had Atwater in 1980 with his 81 with his famous quote.
I'm not a huge. I don't know enough about him to have an opinion really about Gold Owl. I don't know enough.
Atwater was something else. I think he was friends with Joe Biden though, so that'll tell you a little bit how much I like Joe Biden. Right? The women he assaulted. But go on.
Nice things about Biden. Famously says, if Lindsey Graham says you're not friends with Joe, then I don't know what's wrong with you.
Wow. I hadn't heard that one. And the back tattoo thing, I wish that were a joke. For the audience who doesn't, that's not a joke. He's got a tattoo of Nixon on his back.
He was on Nixon's team during Watergate, and that's how he really made his name. And then he and Manafort and the other guy, they started that firm. Manafort, Stone, and I can't think of the third guy's name. But
I'm looking forward to Nikki Haley 2024. That's what
Haley will be up there. I think Candace Owens is going to try to run. She's not going to be successful. I do.
She's going to get destroyed.
Yeah, she'll get obliterated. Amash is going to try. He's going to try third party, and you'll see what's her face. The former CEO of HP of Hewlett Packard. What's her name?
Oh yes. Is it Williams?
Oh,
Megan Williams, something like that. Anyway, you'll see her.
Yeah, she's not going to go anywhere.
But yeah, the Republicans want to elect the first female president. I guarantee.
Yeah, which will be just a nice little dig at the Democrats there. So yeah,
Tony, stop it.
What?
Stop it. If nominated, I will not run, and if elected, I will not serve.
I'm over 35. Let's go.
So I got to ask you that while we're here, that I want to try to ask you one more question because we've been skirting it. I want to get to the lockdown and your views on the legality of that, because you talked about the standards and the test as to whether or not something. But I do want to ask you really quickly, what do you think of the Republicans for Trump movement? That there's a formal Republicans for Trump movement, which is trying to get Republicans for Biden, Republicans for Trump.
Yeah, it's like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, no, Republicans. And so Colin Powell just came out and said that he will it's not that he won't support Trump. He is actively voting for Biden. Cindy McCain said she will not support Trump. Bush has said he won't support Trump. There's been a whole bunch. What are your views on that? Just it's off topic, I know, but I figured.
My view is that Biden is just incoherent and incompetent. For what it's worth, I actually donated money to Yang in the primaries because I thought he was a really good candidate. And I also supported to a lesser degree Tulsi Gabbard because I thought some of her policies were really, really interesting. I think UBI is a really interesting idea, especially if we use it as a complete substitute for all current programs in place.
No.
It has a lot of well, I'm talking for me. It has some appeal to me. I don't know about you. Anyways.
Oh boy, I think you're going to come back. I think you may also be a regular on ProLib's channel. But I think you're going to come back, and we'll have
make a video about it, pal. Let's see what happens.
I'm sorry. Whatever I said, I'm sorry.
He only threatens. He only threatens like 2/3, 3/4 the guests. Don't worry about it.
I do want to say, I don't like many of the modern Democrats either. It's not like I just want to put that out there.
Biden is just incoherent. I mean, he honest to God doesn't know where he is. I see him lose the plot in interviews all the time. He doesn't know where he is.
Listen,
yeah.
In December on my channel, I made a video that said if Joe Biden was the nominee, that Trump would get reelected. Okay. Mm-hmm. So, well, I am not a fan of Joe Biden, and I never have been.
I think Trump's odds of winning are not too bad. I mean, I know the economic numbers have to be revised, but they did just show like 2 million jobs gained. Now, I think that was an overestimate. Someone was saying, but they were predicting like 7 million. They were predicting 7 million loss, and they got a 2 million gain. So they were only off by several million. So I think the economy is pretty good. I think that the social justice left drives me absolutely crazy. I think the idea, I don't understand what they mean by defund the police. I mean, you can't mean that literally.
Yes.
Can you?
Yeah, literally. Yes, literally.
They do.
Because
it's a literal thing.
Then presumably, because I saw one thing where it's like we're doing armed citizen patrols.
No, that's not. No, it's about decommitifying. Do you really want to go into that? I mean, we can go into this, but I can.
Let's save it for the hangout. We're going to do the hangout.
I don't understand what it is, so I don't.
Okay, I can explain.
I don't understand it yet.
It's very easy.
But FYI, so I see all this Yang gang. About 80 to 90% of the people ever to have worked on In Time, and most of our guests, especially during that time, were all pro Yang. We actually had on Fred the Felon for.
I donate to him. I'm just saying.
Which was So you're at home here. So I want to wrap up with this question because you had wanted to hit it, and then we can move that off into the hangout too if people want to get it. So what was the standard that you think for the lockdowns being legal versus now? So what was the standard? It sounded like you were suggesting that in your view it got met then, and it may or may not be now. Okay, how did it get met in your view?
Well, here's what I think. It's 2 months ago, or when this all started, basically late February, early March, which is long ago at this point. So 3 months ago, when this kind of all started, the problem was at that point there was so much uncertainty. And we didn't really know the full parameters of this thing and what its likely impact was going to be. We knew it was rapidly spreading. We knew that there was a problem. We didn't know its fatality rate. We didn't know its vectors, but we knew that there was an issue and we could see some problems going. So, for example, that would be why Trump putting in place those travel bans, which might otherwise be unconstitutional, would be constitutional because those needs we're trying to keep the disease out of the United States or reduce its impact on the United States. So like those analysis change. But here's the thing. A couple things have changed since then. So I think we were in intermediate scrutiny. So because we weren't doing it because of protected reasons. We weren't discriminating against people because of color or race or things. The reason we were discriminating was because of the disease. So it wasn't based on views. It wasn't based on subject. It wasn't based on race. It was because of the disease, or that was ostensibly the reason, at least. So to me, intermediate scrutiny looks like the right analysis. So for example, in your normal routine run-of-the-mill law, you just need a legitimate interest and legitimate means. In intermediate scrutiny, you go up. So you don't need just legitimate. You need substantial, and you can't just use any means. They have to be narrowly tailored means. And if we want to go up from there, then it's not just substantial, it's compelling. It's not just narrowly tailored, but least restrictive, and that's strict scrutiny. But I think intermediate scrutiny is the one that applies because it was neutral applicability, and it's based in a zone of uncertainty. So that creates a range that we're not quite sure where we are, so we can do things because of the uncertainty. A couple things have happened since then. First, we've gained a lot more information about how this disease spreads and its vectors. We've since learned, for example, that kids seem to not be a vector for this disease. So that, for example, might cause us to say, well, we can bring schools back because kids don't seem to be a vector for this. And we've also learned that it doesn't work. It doesn't seem to be a problem in open air environments where people are spread. So there's no reason in general to keep people out of parks or in open air spaces. There does seem to be some problem in closed air spaces, but we seem to be able to mitigate that with face masks and other situations. and the threat profile isn't as high because the fatality rate of COVID is something like, I forget the exact numbers, but 0.6, 0.7%, where people were thinking it would be
the
much
mortality rate
higher
is
than
what?
that. 0.6%?
That's curiosity. Where are you getting that number from?
Oh, I'm just basing it off various news reports I read.
All right.
I think 0.6%, 0.7% is what I've been reading. If you want to correct me, but that's what
the numbers we've been using is the World Health Organization. At last I checked, was saying 3.7% for mortality rates, which is and the reason that's important is because that's significantly higher than flu, and 3.7 a lot of people are suggesting is probably low because of a number of factors we don't need to get into right now. But all right, let's I'm not sure that the numbers, my suspicion is, and probably a few people, we can get the latest mortality figures from the World Health Organization.
maybe I'm not I'm a little bit skeptical of WHO. I'd prefer CDC statistics, but anyways.
All right, let's see what we got for you. Please continue. I apologize for interrupting.
But now the situation is different, and I think the way we respond to these protests in particular has elevated that, because if we can bring people into mass environments, for the purposes of denouncing racism, then it's not about the disease now, is it? And now we're discriminating on people based on what they are saying. So we'll allow it if you're going to say Black Lives Matter, but we won't allow it if you are doing other things, and that doesn't really work. Because you're treating different people based on subject matter, based on viewpoint. You can't do that if you're the government. So you can't say, well, because this message is, you have to let people spread any message evenly. You can't be biased to messages. So that's why I think it comes out differently. So now we're in a strict scrutiny analysis, and it doesn't work.
All right.
Well, and the pushback on that is that George Floyd didn't die because he was anyone. George Floyd died because he was black. And that's why the message of these protests is Black Lives Matter.
Well, I mean, that is a little assumptive, but he died improperly. He died in a way that is a violation of his rights. I'll give you that for sure. The motivation in the cop's own head, I mean, we will certainly gain more information about that, but it was
because he was a racist. That's pretty.
My understanding is
go way out on a limb.
My understanding was he's just a pretty bad cop. He'd been disciplined like 15 times.
Sure.
He'd been part of like 6 or something questionable shoots. So I'm not sure racism was his number one problem.
I think institutional racism is why he still had a job. So
yeah, well, institutional racism is a trigger word for me, so we'll just move past that and move on to other things.
It's okay.
Well, that's what.
It's fun to ignore things that exist in your worldview. Go on.
Okay.
All right. Here's what. So, I think what we're gonna do is this: we're gonna start the hangout. I will be taking bets. $5. We're gonna see gloves are coming off for the hangout, and we're gonna,
Hold on 1 second. Betsy!
Oh God.
No. It's fine. Keep going. It's fine. Can you get my glass knuckles?
What's the over under on me being called a fascist? That's the only real question.
Not in the next 2 or 3 minutes. Nick's still talking.
Yeah. No, he's gonna wait till I'm quiet on that. But I think he already called you one before the stream started. I'm saying
more of a soft fascist, not like a direct fascist.
Oh God.
I'm sorry. I was gonna mute.
Okay. You see what? Do you understand now what I meant when I said about the mute at the beginning and him not talk? I mean, I was right about that. You were thinking, you're like, oh, Nick's fun. You agree with me. You see my pain. You feel my pain. All right. So
we can talk in a respectful way, and we can have a mutual exchange of ideas, and maybe we'll both be smarter at the end. That'll be plus.
Oh wait. Ethan's coming to this? Because if he's coming, we may have issues there. No, it'll be good. So I'm going to start I'll start the hangout. The hangout will go live in about 5 minutes. We're just going to reset our systems here. You guys can just still chill in the rooms you're in, because we're going to just relaunch OBS. So the link, it's actually on the site. You know what? I can drop a link to the hangout, and anyone can come join us. We will also put a link in the description to the hangout if it's not in there yet. I think it may not be in there yet. So we'll put.
Thank you again for the invitation. I had a lot of fun. I hope you did too, and hopefully we can do some more of this in the future.
For sure.
I
am not one of those people that believes in canceling somebody I disagree with.
Excellent.
I believe in engagement. So
well, and truth be told, what I'll say is this too: is we do have a tendency towards left-leaning guests, and I'd like to get more right-leaning guests. As opposed to correctly leaning guests, but at any rate, So, and I think definitely we could do a discussion on, Citizens United would be, both Ethan and I are very much against Citizens United. I wasn't being tongue in cheek. I'd be okay with it with a modification that needs to be made with or without it anyway. If you make the modifications irrelevant, but I would love to have that discussion. Would love to have you back on. So let's go do the hangout. And anyone who wants to join us, I've put a link there to it on YouTube. It'll be in the description of YouTube. It'll be a hangout. Anyone can come on in and yell at Ethan all you like. All right. We'll see you guys in a little bit. Thank you, Uncivil Law, for joining us. Thank you, Ethan, and look forward to catching you guys in about 5 minutes.
Respect.